All right, welcome back. So in part one, we watched the cracks form in the Russian Empire. Now, in part two, we're jumping right in at the moment a 300-year-old dynasty doesn't just crack, it completely shatters. And from that chaos, something brand new and radical starts to rise.
Okay, so here's our roadmap. We're going to start with the fall of the Tsar. Then we'll look at the chaotic power struggle that came next. After that, it's the October Revolution, the creation of the Soviet state, Stalin's really brutal collectivization program, and finally, we'll see how this whole thing sent shockwaves around the world.
So, let's get right into it. The year is 1917. It's a desperate, freezing winter in Russia's capital, Petrograd. And this city, it is a powder keg ready to blow. What's wild is that the city itself is physically divided, and that geography tells you everything you need to know about the social divide.
Think about it like this. On one side of the River Neva, you've got the workers' quarters. On the other side, the fancy government buildings, the Winter Palace, the whole shebang. And on the workers' side, things were absolutely dire. It was a perfect storm just waiting for a spark.
And you have to understand, this wasn't just one thing. It was a chain reaction, a domino effect. You know, the war is causing millions of casualties, which sucks up all the country's resources. That leads to massive food shortages. Then, you throw in a brutal winter and a government that seems totally incapable of fixing anything. Well, suddenly, the Tsar's rule isn't just unpopular, it's becoming impossible to live with.
And the speed of this, it was just staggering. I mean, think about it, 300 years of an autocratic dynasty gone. Poof, in less than a week. And this wasn't some carefully planned coup, you know. It was a spontaneous explosion from the people. And the real game changer? When the soldiers, the very foundation of the Tsar's power, decided to join the protesters. That was it.
And this is what really brings it home. It wasn't just about big ideas, it was about real people. People like Marfa Vasilova, a factory worker who basically said, "I can't eat while others are starving." It was statements like that, so simple and powerful, that lit the fuse. For her and millions of others, this wasn't just politics, it was personal. It was about survival.
Okay, so the Tsar is out. Great, right? Well, not so fast. His leaving didn't magically create a stable government. Instead, it left this giant power vacuum. It's like the whole country was up for grabs, and it led to this really tense, weird situation where you basically had two governments trying to run the show at the same time.
So on one side, you've got the official, provisional government. This is your Duma leaders, your landowners, the establishment. But they're kind of losing their grip. Because on the other side, the real power is in the streets, with the Petrograd Soviet. This is a council of workers and soldiers. And their ideas for where Russia should go, they were on a total collision course, especially when it came to the war.
And right into the middle of all this chaos, in walks Vladimir Lenin. He's the leader of the Bolsheviks, he's been in exile, and now he's back. And he shows up in April 1917 with a plan that is so simple, so direct, it just slices through all the political noise.
Honestly, his April theses were just a masterclass in political messaging. He took everything people were desperate for and boiled it down to three simple demands. Peace, that's for the soldiers sick of the war, land for the peasants who worked it, and bread for everyone who was starving. I mean, it's a brilliant slogan. How could the provisional government even begin to compete with that?
So as we move through the summer and into the fall of 1917, you can just feel the provisional government's authority completely dissolving. The war is still dragging on, nothing's happening with the land, and people are getting more and more desperate. And Lenin, he sees this. He knows this is his chance. The time is now for the Bolsheviks to make their move.
So this was the million-dollar question, right? Who's actually going to end up running Russia? For Lenin, the stakes couldn't have been higher. He was genuinely afraid that if his Bolsheviks didn't act fast, some military general would swoop in, set up a dictatorship, and just crush the entire revolution. So he starts getting his people ready for the big one.
Now this was nothing like the February Revolution, which was, spontaneous. No, this was a swift, ruthlessly efficient, planned takeover. Leon Trotsky was leading the charge, and the Bolsheviks basically seized the entire capital in a single day. By the time the sun went down, the provisional government was history. Just like that. Okay, so now the Bolsheviks are in charge, and they aren't just thinking about governing Russia. Oh no. They're planning to tear the whole thing down and rebuild it from scratch. We're talking a radical, top-to-bottom transformation of society, and they didn't waste any time. Look, we're not talking about minor tweaks here. This was a complete upending of, well, everything. All private property, gone. Banks and industry, nationalized. They told the peasants to go ahead and seize the land from the nobles. They even banned old aristocratic titles. And of course, they pulled Russia out of the war.
But at the same time, they moved fast to lock down their power, creating a one-party state and setting up their own secret police, the Cheka, to deal with anyone who disagreed.
Now, you can't just flip a country upside down like that and not expect a fight. Of course, this radical takeover didn't go unchallenged. What it triggered was an absolutely brutal and bloody civil war that just plunged the country even deeper into chaos and starvation.
So who was fighting who? Well, you had the Bolshevik Reds, their army, and fighting them was this loose, messy coalition called the Whites. This was basically everyone else, people who wanted the Tsar back, liberals, even other socialists who hated the Bolsheviks. And get this, the Whites were getting help from countries like Britain, France, and the US, who were terrified of this whole socialism thing spreading. And then, to make it even more complicated, you had the Greens, who were peasant armies fighting for their own patch of land.
So, even with all these foreign powers helping the other side and fighting on a bunch of different fronts, the Bolsheviks won. How? Well, a big reason was that the whites just completely blew it with the peasants. They were really harsh with peasants who had taken land, and that cost them all their popular support. The Bolsheviks, on the other hand, solidified their control, and by December 1922, they officially created the Soviet Union, the USSR.
Lenin dies, and the revolution takes a turn, a much darker, much more brutal turn. This is the era of Joseph Stalin. And Stalin had one overriding goal: to turn the Soviet Union into an industrial superpower. And he was willing to do it at any, and I mean any, human cost.
So how is he going to pay for all this industrialization? His big idea was called collectivization. And here's what it meant. Starting in 1929, the party forced millions of peasants to give up their land, their animals, everything, and join these huge state-controlled mega-farms. The official line was, hey, this will modernize farming and get rid of all the capitalists out in the country. But the reality was very different.
You can probably guess this policy didn't go over well. The resistance was fierce, it was everywhere, you had peasants killing their own animals rather than turn them over to the state. And how did the state respond? Well, as you can see from this actual police report from the time, they responded with overwhelming, unbelievable brutality.
And you know, we hear about these kulaks, these supposedly wealthy peasants. But for millions of just regular people, collectivization meant one thing: total ruin. This letter here from a peasant named Afanasy is just heartbreaking. He lost everything. It really puts a human face on this immense state-enforced tragedy.
The result of all this chaos? A devastating, completely man-made famine. We're talking an estimated 4 million people dead. That was the terrifying price tag on Stalin's vision of progress.
Now, this whole thing wasn't just contained within Russia's borders. Oh no, the Russian Revolution sent shockwaves across the entire planet. I mean, think about it. The creation of the world's first socialist state run by workers? For some people, that was a source of incredible hope. For others, it was their worst nightmare.
Let's talk about the hope first. For a lot of people, especially in countries that were still colonies, the Soviet Union looked like a radical new possibility. You have people like Shaukat Usmani, a revolutionary from India, who looked at the USSR and saw a land of real equality, a beacon of hope that a world without emperors and kings was actually possible.
But not everyone was a true believer. You had others, like the famous poet Rabindranath Tagore, who had a more complicated view. He visited, and he was amazed by the social progress. He saw the huge jumps in education. He saw workers feeling empowered. But he also saw the mess, the dirt, the gritty reality of what this new state actually looked like day to day. And that really brings us to the core of it all, the huge, complicated legacy of this revolution. On the one hand, by the 1950s, a country that was seen as backwards was now a global superpower. Its industry was developed, agriculture was working, the poor were being fed. But on the other hand, it did all this by crushing essential freedoms, by using policies so repressive it's hard to even imagine. Which leaves us with the big question, one that people are still debating today: what is the true price of revolution?